This is Green Street, the environmental health show, greenstreetnews.org, Patty and Doug Wood, and our worldwide network of medical and scientific experts, reporters, authors, and others here every week to keep you informed about what is going on in the world that can impact your health and the health of your family. Welcome back. We've talked a lot on the show about PFAS, those forever chemicals that are ubiquitous in our world and which are being blamed for a growing list of human health conditions. Usually we're talking about a new study or a new unhappy discovery, but on our show today we're going to talk about the personal impact that exposure to PFAS chemicals has had on people living in the middle of contaminated areas. And you'll have the chance to meet two brave and dedicated individuals who've taken it upon themselves to make sure the world knows about PFAS contamination and who are forcing the government to take action. That's all coming up on this edition of Green Street, but first, some of the news headlines of the week. Patty, what do you got for us this week?
Okay, so this one is about microplastics, which we haven't talked about too much lately. Just a joke. So researchers from Bond University in Australia conducted a deeper look at previous studies to assess the presence of microplastics and even smaller nanoplastics in the urinary tract. They found the contaminants were in 54% of urine samples, 70% of kidney samples, and 68% of bladder cancer cases. The authors concluded that the plastic debris was harming human urinary tract cells by causing toxicity and inflammation, reducing cell survival. About 368 million tons of plastic were produced in 2019. And that is expected to double by 2039. That's in 20 years, we're going to double the amount of plastic that we're producing on this planet. Yeah. And this has resulted in the accumulation of minuscule fragments which have found their way into all aspects of the environment. One of the researchers, PhD candidate Liam O'Callaghan, said it was impossible to avoid microplastics. Quote, "We're drinking them, we're eating them, we're breathing them. They can be absorbed through the skin," he said. And when you heat up plastic containers, there can be millions of these tiny microplastics that leach into the food. You might filter your water, but if that filter is made of plastic, over time, it is going to start to degrade and pollute the water that you're drinking.
Yeah, that's what you've been talking about that for a while.
Yeah. Even tea bags are coated in plastic so the paper doesn't disintegrate when you pour in boiling water. And these bags release billions of plastic particles into your tea.
Yeah, this is a focus of international study right now because everybody's worried about what the effect of these pieces of plastic are having on people.
Yep. And people are buying their food packaged in plastic every single day.
Yeah.
And they're ripping open those plastic bags, as I have done.
And pieces of plastic go flying into the food.
And pieces of plastic are going into the food that they're then going to eat.
You know, you can't see it, so people don't realize.
That's right. Nanoplastics are invisible to the naked eye.
They're so tiny.
Yep. Yep.
Holy Caruso. All right. Well, the EPA's been busy cutting off funds that had been promised to bring clean water to rural black community in Maryland, to farm workers in California, to tribal villages in Alaska. The money was also meant to tackle cancer-causing radon gas seeping into rural homes in Utah and help monitor air pollution in communities racked with respiratory illnesses in Louisiana's petrochemical corridor. All of them had received grants from the EPA programs that have emerged as the prime targets of the budget-cutting knife under President Donald Trump, those devoted to environmental justice. The 8 programs on EPA's chopping block include the entire Environmental and Climate Justice Block grant program that Congress approved as part of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 under President Joe Biden. But in the Trump administration's reframing of the government's environmental mission, such programs are a form of favoritism. They've been lumped together with equal opportunity, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that the administration has vowed to eradicate. And Zeldin's EPA has resisted releasing the funding for those programs despite a federal judge's order that the hold on grants be lifted. I mean, Congress authorized the money, Congress appropriated the money, and Trump is just saying, no, we're not going to do that. And it falls completely on these poor communities that need the money the most.
No, they need the clean air, the clean water, the clean soil to grow their gardens in. This is where we are. And to lump this whole thing into DEI,
Yeah, Trump called for the agencies to terminate environmental justice grant programs as part of his anti-DEI executive order, signed on his first day in office. Turning on its head the notion that such programs are meant to address historic and ongoing disenfranchisement, Trump said they were themselves a form of, quote, shameful discrimination, unquote. So
we're just discriminating against wealthy white communities. Is that correct?
Yep,
Is that what he's saying?
Right. That's right. It's unconscionable what they're doing, but they're doing it and they're getting away with it. All right, what else you got?
Well, a federal district court this week dismissed a lawsuit alleging the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency failed to prevent the contamination of farmland across the country with toxic PFAS in sewage sludge that was used as fertilizer.
That was the lawsuit brought by our friends at PEER, right? The Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility.
Right. As much as 60% of sewage sludge produced each year by U.S. wastewater treatment plants is spread on farmland.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that much. I thought it was a little bit. 60%.
60%, with the rest either sent to landfills or incinerated. While it is treated to remove pathogens or disease-causing material, right. There are no national requirements to test sewage sludge for PFAS, and almost 70 million acres of U.S. farmland can be contaminated with the forever chemicals.
Holy cow.
The ruling means that farms and farmers across the country will remain vulnerable to PFAS and sewage sludge without help from federal regulators. Well, wait a second, what does this really mean? How about all the people eating the food that's being grown on those farms?
Yeah.
We're all eating it. The entire American population is eating food that is being grown with PFAS-contaminated fertilizers.
And we know that the plants are taking up the PFAS into their flesh and into the fruits.
And PFAS, as we all know, is a class of chemicals which are highly persistent in the environment and in the bodies of humans and animals, and are linked to a variety of health harms, including several types of cancers. PEER is weighing whether to file an appeal, asking the judge to reconsider the ruling, or petition the EPA for a rulemaking, a process that would take years.
I was just going to say, this is going to take years. In the meantime, they're going to continue to spread this PFAS-laden fertilizer all over farmland,
and
permanently
they've been
contaminating
doing it
the land.
for decades. We're going to have a lot more about people whose lives have been impacted by PFAS contamination coming up in just a few minutes.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Patty.
You're welcome. Pretty much every day, there's another news story about the forever chemicals known as PFAS. Unusual places where they're being found, the health problems they're causing, how they're contaminating our farmland, being taken up by crops and entering our food supply. But a lot of these news stories are impersonal reports. What is it like to actually be living the nightmare of PFAS contamination? To find out, we got in touch with two people who are doing just that. Two dedicated people who have found themselves on the front lines of the fight over PFAS in drinking water in Michigan. Sandy Wynn and Tony Spaniola are the movers and shakers behind the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network. Doug and I had the opportunity to meet with them earlier this week to hear their stories. Here's part of our conversation with Sandy Wynn and Tony Spaniola.
My family has had a home in northern Michigan, a home on a lake. It's in the middle of the Huron National Forest. We can walk to the shores of Lake Huron. Spectacular with wildlife, bald eagles, I mean, you name it. And there is a former Air Force base that is nestled in the midst of all of that, right across the lake from our home. And if you're talking about PFAS in Michigan, and you're talking about water in Michigan and problems with water in Michigan, you have to talk about Flint, because the Flint water crisis was brewing, in the middle of the last decade. And at our location, it's the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base, and it is the first U.S. military PFAS site in the world. So the PFAS contamination from the firefighting foam that was used just liberally there was first discovered in March of 2010. So we've been at it with the Air Force now. We're in our 16th year.
Wow.
And it sort of chugged along for a few years. There was a warning not to eat any fish from kind of a pristine river in the middle of the national forest in 2012. And then in 2016, we received notification from the health department saying, don't drink your water. We have this, they were called PFCs back then. That was the term that was used.
Right.
So don't drink your water, but we've got this under control. Uh, which is
Wow. Okay. So
so
it sounds a little suspicious, but
that's to calm down the hysteria. Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So just like the people in Flint, they gave us water filters and essentially said, hey, we're working on this. The Air Force came in and talked about how they were being really proactive. And I began doing research. My father was in the legislature here in Michigan when I was a kid in the 1970s, and we had a contamination crisis then, which was the largest contamination crisis in U.S. history from polybrominated biphenyl in cattle. So I was in the midst of that. I took a year off from school, studied all that, and so I started hearing a lot of the same old, hey, it's not a big deal. And so as I began digging into it, I began to realize this was a really, really, really big deal.
Yeah.
Way, not only in my community, but across the state, across the country, not just from Air Force bases or military installations or commercial airports, but it's in just about all the products that we know and come to learn about. And so things were so bad. The cover up that was going on was so bad. People were being so badly misled. I had originally said to my wife, I'm not going to get in the middle of this. We come up here to get away.
Yeah.
It was so bad that I didn't feel I had any choice.
What is that behind you on your screensaver? Is that a picture of the edge of the lake?
That's my backyard. That is the PFAS foam. And that picture was taken in 2017, so 8 years ago. And it was that morning, my wife woke up and said, I think it snowed last night. And I said, that's not snow. And so we organized a community action group. We all got together one day, sat around a table and asked everybody if they were all in, because we knew it was going to be a tough fight. Not only we're fighting the Pentagon, we're fighting a lot of business in the area that didn't want bad news going out, a lot of homeowners who didn't want bad news going out. The whole, it's the story that plays out over and over and over again. And so we began really a campaign. It became apparent to me that there were no real accountability mechanisms with the Pentagon and the military. Yeah. The only real accountability mechanism was Congress through oversight, the power of the purse, and policy. We worked with a lot of policy folks here in the state, our governor, our attorney general, and even with the White House during the Biden administration very closely. I got to know Sandy and essentially got together and said, we can't do this alone. We got to get together. Our power is collectively, and it is the power that we have as we come together and share stories like the one you're just about to hear.
Okay, Sandy, so it looks like it's your turn. Tell us your story.
Well, my story actually started, let's say, in 1991 when I met my husband through work. I'm a psychologist. My husband, Joel, was a Children's Protective Services worker. So we worked in human services, fell in love, got married, bought our first house. And given the work we do, we hate people. And so we wanted to be away from everyone. We didn't want any neighbors. We didn't want anything. So we found a house just north of Grand Rapids that was surrounded by Christmas trees. It was in a Christmas tree farm. And that's a piece of heaven, in Michigan.
Sure.
It doesn't get any better than that. And we lived really dull and boring lives for the next 25 years. I got nothing dramatic to say in the middle of that. In 2016, we were getting ready to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary. Joel was having some stomach problems. They thought maybe it was a hernia. So he went in for hernia surgery, but they found that he had stage 4 liver cancer and he died 3 weeks later.
Oh my gosh.
I was devastated. There's no other word for it. I was just blown away. It was so fast. It was so quick, so unexpected. The following year in 2017 was when the Department of Environmental Quality came to my door and asked if they could test our water because they thought there could be some contamination. Now, that was right on the heels of Flint. Like, Flint wasn't even done. They were still handing out water there. They came back 3 days later to test my water wearing hazmat suits, which kind of makes you go,
wow. Yeah.
That's a problem. And it turned out it wasn't to protect the people taking the samples. I learned a lot about PFAS after that. It was because they were worried about cross-contamination. But fast forward, they came to my house 3 weeks later, 3 carloads of state officials, And given that I've worked for the state and so did my husband, I knew that was not going to be good news
Yeah.
because they never deliver that in person. My water, the first well test came back at 24,000 parts per trillion. The next one was 36,000 parts per trillion. It's been as high as 80,000 parts per trillion. It turned out that Christmas tree farm that we loved was actually owned by Wolverine Worldwide, the shoe company. They make Sauconys, they make Merrell shoes. They are an incredibly good shoe company and incredibly irresponsible, I'll just say it. Because what they did was they had 60 acres that they would truck their tannery waste to and dump. And they would dig pits 20 feet deep and just back up truckload after truckload after truckload and keep dumping. And they did that all through the 70s until it actually bubbled up and was quite smelly, at which point they punched through the clay underlining that's a natural part of our geography here. So it would go into the aquifer and go out to the river. As a result, it's contaminated 30 square miles of our community up here. I remember when they came and talked to me the first time, you know, they say 24,000 is your levels. And I didn't know anything about PFAS. I didn't know if I had won, if that was good or if that was bad.
Yeah.
I remember saying that to them, like, is high good or is high bad? Like, you know, is this the stock market I'm going for? Or is this like, you know, what am I measuring against? And they said, no, this is the highest. And one person even said, I think this is higher than Wordsmith. And I said, the Air Force Base? I remember reading an article about that in the paper. That stuff's not good. To fast forward later, I ended up getting my blood tested. And my blood is tested at 5,000 nanograms per microliter. Whereas I think the normal, and the fact that we have to say this is normal in our blood should anger all of us, because none of us should want this in our blood, is between 5 and maybe 15. If you're at 20, doctors say you should be concerned, and I'm at 5,000.
Wow.
So at that point, I was kind of frantic trying to figure out how did this happen? And I remember they were reading off the list of potential health concerns. And they said, you know, high blood pressure and high cholesterol and thyroid issues and kidney cancer, testicular cancer, liver disease. And I said then, seriously, my husband just died of liver cancer. And the room went silent. And it was one of those moments that we all have in our life where you could just feel the earth tilt on its axis. And I knew then from that day forward, my life was different.
So why are they using PFAS in a shoe tanning operation? I've never heard of that. I've heard of so many uses, but not
Waterproofing.
that. So waterproofing, is that what
Wolverine,
it is?
yeah, Wolverine Worldwide had the first waterproof shoes ever in their Hush Puppy shoes. And they had the proprietary rights to Scotchgard at that time to use on shoes. And it took a lot of Scotchgard to waterproof those Hush Puppies, but they also sold like proverbial hotcakes. So they were really cranking them out. And their factory at that time was right in Rockford, which is 5 miles away. So they had just bought this land. They actually sold it to farmers to spread on fields all through this northern Kent County area, saying that the lime in it would be really good fertilizer. So it's our whole county is contaminated now with this in our wells and our water sources.
But they knew better. They knew better even back then.
3M certainly knew better.
Yeah.
Wolverine is saying they didn't know until the 90s. My line then was a knock at the door would have been really good.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
When I bought the house in 92. Had you even told me in 95, then it would have at least been on me to do something.
Sure.
But no one said anything.
Wow, that is quite a story, Sandy. I'm so sorry about
Thank you.
the impact that it has had on your life. Oh my God.
Well, you know, I do have to say, blood testing has become this passion of mine. I'm like determined people have to be able to get their blood tested. It cost me $800 out of pocket to do it because insurance does not cover blood testing for you. And because I had these crazy rates, my doctor thankfully took it very seriously And in 2000 started noticing some things on a whim, literally said, only because you've got these crazy PFAS levels, I want to do an ultrasound of your thyroid. And they found that I had developed thyroid cancer that had moved into my lymph nodes that we never would have found had I not had this. I shouldn't say never. I doubt we would have found it, and I know we wouldn't have found it that early had we not had that blood work. So when we have people that are contaminated, they have to fight like the Dickens just to get blood testing. I mean, Tony, you guys have been working how long, and you've just gotten blood testing up there?
We fought for 10 years. The Department of Defense absolutely refuses to do it. The state of Michigan now in Oscoda over the last couple of years has begun to offer free blood testing to everybody in our community.
So Tony, in your case, you had a community of people who kind of were sharing your situation and were ready to kind of jump in and do something about it. Sandy, you were by yourself, right? I mean, how did you network and find other people?
I went for a walk the night after they came and gave me my results. And I would go for a walk every night because one of the best ways to deal with grief and depression is being outside in the sunlight 30 minutes a day. It's actually as effective as Prozac, believe it or not. So every day I would go for a walk. This time I decided to go the opposite direction on my street where all the neighbors are. And I saw people there getting the giant things of water that they handed out in Flint. That was kind of what everybody remembered, people in Flint getting those cases of water. So I noticed all my neighbors had this too, and just went up and said, so you got results that were bad too. And we got together, would get together every Friday and just try to figure out what we were going to do with this. We were going to go to Wolverine and demand free shoes because we thought they owed us that at least, but happened to call Rob Balott, the lawyer.
Oh, yeah, sure.
He said, I'm just going to give you 3 quick pieces of advice. First, you have to get a lawyer and a good law firm. Don't get like just your brother-in-law, Bob, who does divorce cases. Second, you need a point of entry filter. Don't let them just give you a quick filter under the sink. You need a big filter that's going to take all of this because this will take a while to sort out. And third, whatever you do, do not go to Wolverine and ask for shoes. See part number 1. So we were very fortunate that we were able to connect with a firm here in town, the only firm that didn't have a conflict of interest with Wolverine.
Sure.
And they took our case. So
my group came together not all that differently from Sandy's.
Okay.
The Air Force would meet with us quarterly, and we would have these meetings, and a few of us kind of got to know each other and started to just, kind of feel each other out a little bit. And then when we formed our group, the day that this picture was taken behind me, we really met for the very first time that day. And it was just this foam that brought us together to say, wait, it's now been 7 years. They've been lying to us. We got to do something.
So we want to know what the something is that you're doing.
Yeah, so let's talk about the organization.
Let's talk about what's going on.
What can be done? What are you doing? What are you hoping for?
I think the first thing Tony and I realized was that neither of us are scientists. We're not regulators. We're none of that. But we have a very compelling story. And these stories repeat themselves over and over. It's not just us.
Sure.
And that was our power. That was like our superpower. But it was also what we had to get in front of decision makers, because I don't care what party you're in. It's really hard to look at a widow and say, I'm not going to prioritize that. I'm going to prioritize something else. And so we wanted to kind of figure out a way to elevate those community voices.
Yeah.
Sandy and I we really came together. We got to know each other a little bit. And then it was in the fall of 2019, I called Sandy and I said, we're going to have a press conference at Wordsmith. And I want to bring people in from all over the state so that we can kind of show unity. And so Sandy came up and we had people from different parts of the states all holding signs saying PFAS in this place, PFAS in that place. And it was so incredibly powerful.
Sure. Very
moving. Of course, we got really good media coverage, but afterwards, Sandy and I said, okay, we've got to figure out a way to bring these communities all together in a network, and to do it in such a way that the network is driven by the community voices, not by folks who are living, wanting to do, meaning well and wanting to do well, but not living the issue.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think we both agree really strongly on is that our policies in this country need to be driven from a community-based, individual harm type. How do we fix this scenario.
Mhm.
And that's the approach we've taken. We've gotten knocked down several times, but we've won a whole bunch too.
Mhm.
And that's been, that's quite a story.
So what are you hoping to do, and what advice do you have for people who find themselves in situations like yours?
Well, I think I think we have a couple things we're trying to do. I think we want a place that communities can learn from each other, help each other, support each other, give each other ideas, because there is no handbook when you've been contaminated of like, what are you supposed to do next? You know, what's the right filter? Should you get a filter? Should you sell your house? I mean, so I think that's one thing, is to provide a resource for communities, but I think also to push change, because the system is really set up for polluters, for manufacturers,
Yeah.
for the people who can profit off of this to profit.
Right.
And for the rest of us just to drink it and smile. And that's just not going to happen.
I think the message that we've learned in Sandy's experience and my experience and what we're seeing now in other parts of the state of Michigan is that if you're going to get any kind of action that's really meaningful, you gotta fight for it. You gotta stand up. If you just sit back and hope, it's not gonna go your way. And there was a community in Michigan that kind of looked at us in Oscoda and said, you're always fighting with the Pentagon, it seems like. You know why? We don't fight in our community, and and we're getting along really well. And my response to them was, well, do you really think you're getting along that well? And by the way, your drinking water is contaminated at 400 or 500 homes. What are you doing about that, and how are you going to get that fixed? And so they kind of followed our model now. They've engaged the members of Congress. They've engaged certain members of the state government, and they're starting to make progress. But if you sit back, it's not going to happen. And we were able, through our organization, the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network, we were able to get our governor to issue an executive directive directing all the state agencies in Michigan to prioritize purchasing non-PFAS containing products, which prevention here really was really the name of the game,
Sure.
right? We also were able to get our governor to establish what's known as the Citizens Advisory Work Group, which Sandy has chaired for a number of years, bringing together, you have to be an impacted community member to be a member of this group. And this group interacts monthly with our state regulators. So we've been able to kind of change their perspective through this organization. In my community, we were able to get $10 million for water line extensions to address contaminated wells. I was able, through working with the White House in 2023, to initiate a policy that we came up with to deal with our problem nationwide. It's a directive that was issued by the Pentagon to all the military service branches, requiring them to adopt a policy under which you attack the contamination in those places initially where it is impacting people, where it is impacting water and wildlife. You contain it, and then you worry about the mess that's in the middle after you've kind of triaged the problem. So that is the policy of the United States. It came from our little town.
That's great, because people who are, suffering from PFAS contamination all over the country will benefit from that.
This is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. It's in everything. And until we decide we're not going to use it in every silly thing we need, we're just going to be throwing good money after bad here.
Sandy Wynn and Tony Spaniola from the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network, talking about how their own lives have been upended by exposure to PFAS in their water. You can learn more about their efforts at glpan.org. Again, glpan.org. That's going to do it for our Green Street Show today. Special thanks to Sandy and Tony for being our guests, and to all of you who listen to and support this show. Patty and I will be back next week with another edition of Green Street. Thanks for listening.